Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my 4-part series of getting as many content creators in the Mariner space as I can in one place to answer some burning questions. Our creators are as follows: Jay's Trident podcast, Colton and Joe from Mariner Mojo, Colby and Ty from Locked On Mariners, Lyle from the Marine Layer podcast, the Jage Page from Twitter, Couch GM, Sean Collins from Collins Like It Is podcast, Patrick from Mariner Muse on Twitter, and Brady Farkas from the Refuse to Lose podcast. Everyone's links are going to be in the description, so I urge you to check them out before you get started. But without further ado, let's get into episode 2. The starting rotation was elite last year for the Mariners. They threw at 92 quality starts, and I would urge you not to look up how many of those we won. The offense is clearly what needs to be upgraded most this winter, but it's been discussed due to the cheap ownership that we may need to leverage one of our starting pitchers in a trade to get a good bat back. Do you think that will happen this winter? And if so, who do you think is most likely to go?
I think the easiest one, or the easiest pill to swallow here, would be trading Luis Castillo, because there's obviously, again, conversation about money, which rules every conversation surrounding this team. So, but on that front, you have to make a lot of assumptions, like how many teams are going to be interested? Are those going to be the same teams that he would actually waive his no trade clause for? Would he waive his no trade clause for any team? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How much money are they going to take? Are they going to be willing to give you something that's actually of value on top of taking on the money? All that stuff. But if the answer is yes on a couple of those things, then I think that's the way to go about it, because, again, it kind of, for lack of a better term, it kills two birds with one stone, right? It frees up some flexibility for you payroll-wise, and it potentially helps you address something on your roster. To me, though, and we've talked about this on the show and a lot, Colby and I just don't know if you're actually going to be able to get proper value for any of your pitchers right now, because we're talking about multiple years of club control at more than reasonable prices for all of these guys, right? Logan less than the others, but Logan still has 3 years left. It is not often that you see a starting pitcher of Logan Gilbert's caliber get traded, right? So there isn't even really much of a comp to make, right? So what does that ultimately look like? And it's a very small needle to thread, in my opinion. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I don't know exactly what makes sense on that front. And then with George Kirby, what pitcher of the magnitude of George Kirby has been traded with 4 years left of club control? And then with Bryce Miller and Brian Wu, again, like when Ryan Divish has talked about this, about the possibility of trading one of these pitchers or multiple of them, he's talked about it from the perspective of, well, they're going to get more expensive, right? So again, money dominates this conversation. And with Wu and Miller, those guys are incredibly important to you, especially over the next couple of years, because at the moment, they're both pre-arb right now. So that doesn't really make sense, because especially if you're going to trade Gilbert or Kirby, maybe it's not this year, but it's next year or the year after, Miller and Wu are very valuable to you. So and it's just, again, what are you going to get for those guys? Especially for Miller, who's now kind of starting to, I don't think he's fully there yet, but we started to see the transformation into an actual complete pitcher. And he found himself in some really good company this year with the stuff that he was doing. Like, what does that look like for 5 years of that guy? Like, what are teams going to be willing to give you for that? And is that actually proper value? So it's just a really difficult conversation. I don't know if I necessarily would be surprised if they traded any of the starting pitchers. I have no idea what it looks like. I know people throw out like the young Orioles players and all that. I mean, one thought that I've had is, like, does Logan Gilbert for Ketel Marte make sense? Maybe. But again, like, even when I'm able to kind of talk myself into an idea, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know. It's a really complicated situation. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if they did it, because it does seem like one of the likeliest paths to add impact, since they're not like real actual impact, because they're not going to spend the money necessary to get those big time free agents. But I just have no idea what it would look like.
I don't think it's likely to happen. I could see them trading Emerson Hancock, so I could see them dealing the 6th of those guys, but I don't think any of the top 5 will get dealt. If they were going to deal one of the top 5, I would deal Castillo, not because I want to, because simply put, it saves you the most money up front, right? Dealing Castillo saves you basically $24 million, a little less than that. It might be $23 million per year starting next year. He's the oldest. He has the most tread on the tires. He is the most expensive. I understand with that probably becomes a lesser return, but since this is so much about money, if I have to trade one of them, I would trade Castillo. I don't want to trade Gilbert, but it has been noted that Gilbert also has an incredibly high max effort delivery. So the idea of him breaking down is probably not unfair to think of either. Miller and Wu certainly throw more freely, although Wu has had the injury issues himself. I would choose Castillo solely for the basis on age and money, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Hancock gets dealt before any of those guys.
I think the caveat is just trying to free up money to then allow the impact to be felt as far as the players that you're adding. The only one that makes sense to trade in terms of freeing up capital, like Ty was saying, the money rules everything, is it's Castillo. At the end of the day, I don't think a trade happens from the starting rotation. Truth be told, I really don't see something kind of coming together in a way that makes sense for what value you're really going to get out of it. But the one that does make the most sense, I think, just in general, is Castillo because of the money he's owed. Personally, if there was a trade out of starting pitching, I don't think it's going to be from the core five. I'd say you're more likely to trade an Emerson Hancock and then allow someone to step into your number 6, the backup guy, Logan Evans steps into that role, Michael Morales steps into that role, maybe Brandon Garcia is ready, or you trade one of those prospects to a team that feels like they're a year away, that they can let them develop, and you get some sort of guy that's a year away on the offensive side, however that kind of works. But again, that's not really the conversation. It's more so about the 5 starting pitchers that you're going to be rolling out there one every 5 days and how they impact the team. I just don't think that they're going to find a trade of value that they like, and kind of similar to how they ended the 2023 offseason of oh, nothing really formulated for Wu and Miller. We're glad we didn't trade them. I think we're going to have a similar conversation at the end of the 2024 offseason about trades around the starting rotation just in general.
Yeah, I agree. Unlikely that they trade any of them. Castillo would be probably the most interesting one for me in terms of trading, but I don't think it's realistic. And I think you've got to probably stick by guys that sign extensions with you too, to a certain extent, although I could definitely see them trading him next year. I think they
Castillo also has a no trade clause, just saying. Yeah. I did not mention that. And there you go.
Through, I believe, January 1st, 2026. He has a full no trade throughout the entire offseason through next season. So yeah, harder to trade him. I think it would be the best baseball move of the 5 to trade him, but I still don't think it's a good baseball move necessarily, because I think to what that source in the Adam Jude article said, I just don't think they're going to get something that will make trading him worth it unless they're truly salary dumping him, which would be kind of crazy. So yeah, but I'm definitely intrigued by the idea of trading one of the 4 young guys for very specifically some of the Orioles players, if that ends up being a match, or less specifically the Cardinals kind of young-ish guys that they have bopping around. And the Cardinals will be motivated to make moves because Mozeliak is kind of getting retired out, and Chaim Bloom's taking over, so he could probably be amenable to a move like that. But I think it's an interesting concept. But to me, the organization is so risk averse. They value their really good young pitchers so much. I don't see it happening. Although I do think it is a super potentially compelling way to make the offense better, especially in the long term.
Yeah. I don't think a trade happens with the rotation. I wouldn't be shocked if it did. You can't rule out anything with Jerry. He's nothing if not creative. My bigger concern than everything Ty laid out there with, can you get proper value for any of your 4 young guys? Can you find a team that has the financial resources to absorb Luis Castillo's contract and the prospects that make sense, or the young major leaguers that make sense for you to trade that guy? There might be 1 or 2 teams like that, but it's only one or two, right? It's not like there's 15 in that market. And then you have to factor in Castillo's no trade clause. So while Castillo is the most likely to be dealt, he's also the hardest one to find a buyer for. So that, muddies the waters a little bit. But my main concern here is not Well, it is a little bit, but secondary concern. Let's put it that way. Who are you replacing Luis Castillo with? Because the strength of this team is pitching. It's going to be pitching. Like, you are never going to have a juggernaut offense at T-Mobile Park. It's not going to happen. No, forget it. Like, your goal is to be consistently above average offensively and to pitch your tails off. And by the way, you get into the playoffs, that's the formula that's going to win it for you too. So you want that formula. Who is going to replace Luis Castillo? Because the only way I can see this working is if you take the money that you freed up trading Luis Castillo, and now you're going and you're spending it on what? A starting pitcher. You do not have his replacement in the minors. It is not Emerson Hancock. Dude is trash. Okay. He is a number 6 starter, number 5 starter. He was worth negative half a win. He has no swing and miss pitches. He doesn't throw quality enough strikes. Trash. Okay. And if Cole Young is not ready to be the second baseman, there is a 0% chance that Logan Evans, Michael Morales, Brandon Garcia are going to step in and give you what Luis Castillo gave you. Forget what you think of Castillo and whether or not he's worth the $24 million or not. Dude's going to give you 180 to 200 innings of high quality baseball. Is he an ace? No, the Mariners don't have one. And that's fine. There's only like 4 or 5 in baseball anyways. He's a very, very good pitcher who's been very durable for the Mariners. And you can't just replace him with league average, because either you have to go trade for that pitcher now, and now you're taking resources away from the offense still to go fix the pitching hole that you've created, or you're going to have to go from Luis Castillo, who at his lowest is like a low-end number 3, and you're going to have to replace him with a guy who at his best is a low-end number 5 from within your system. I don't like it. I don't get it. I don't think that the money you free up is actually going to do all that much to you and is actually going to make you better, because I look at what pitchers are getting out there in the free agent market right now. Taijuan Walker got $18 million a year ago. Like, Jamison Tyone got $19 million a few years ago. Like, those guys suck. Like, all due respect to Ty Walker, love the dude. He sucks. He got benched. He's not good. He's a number 4 starter that you just paid $18 million to.
Bro,
Castillo
bench
at
for
24.
Spencer Turnbull, dude. That's crazy.
Oh, I love Spencer Turnbull. He was on my off-season plan last winter. But
there you go.
But yeah, like what's the net like what gets you to the net positive, right? Is it just keeping your 5 guys, or is it trading one of your guys, just rolling with Brandon Garcia, Logan Evans, whatever, and whatever you get with that money you free up, or whatever you get via the trade, or both, whatever, right? Does that lead you to a more bigger net positive, whatever, right? Then just staying pat.
And that brings you to the point that you talked about. It's an incredibly like small needle to thread. Like, there is absolutely a scenario where you can trade him, get, roughly the equivalent of Castillo as a pitcher, still have some money left over to spend on a bat or whatever. But A, there's not a lot of bats out there. And B, pitching is incredibly expensive. Even average number 4 starters are incredibly expensive on the free agent market, and they're incredibly expensive in trade. I just don't see it. I don't see a path where you trade Castillo and you end up net positive on the deal. There's, like I said, maybe there's a way out there. Maybe they figure it out. And if they do, build a statue. That's great. I don't see it. My bigger concern is not, hey, how do they get the bat, by trading one of the pitchers? It's how do they replace the pitcher they trade without going out and spending significant resources, either free agent or, trade assets, to go and just replace the guy that you already had in your system. I'd rather just go get the bats. And one other thing, I just like to say, I reject the idea that the Mariners have to trade from their rotation to get better offensively. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. They can get better offensively. Again, the goal is not to be a juggernaut offensively. It's to be more consistently above average for 6 months. You do that, you're going to win 95 games. Imagine this Mariners team with the offense they had over the last 5 weeks. They win 100 games. We're talking about them playing in the World Series at that point, if they had just an average offense. So I don't like the idea that you have to trade a pitcher to get better offensively. No, you don't. And also, I don't like the idea that, well, you just trade Castillo and you just replace him with Emerson Hancock. Dude's a scrub. You need to do a lot better. And better than that is going to cost you $15 million. Okay. Which is 60% of what you saved on Castillo if they take all the money. So no, I'm out. But to answer the question, if they do trade a guy, it'll be Castillo. Do I think they trade a guy? Probably not, but they might.
Right.
I mean,
with
that's a
how
boring way to answer the question, but
with how
okay.
trash you describe Emerson Hancock, though, they might not need to spend $15 million. I could just go out there and pitch for the Mariners, and I'd be better than Emerson
I
Hancock.
can replace Emerson Hancock in 5 minutes. Okay.
I have to stand up for our guy because he's our guy. So
You do that. Trash. Trash.
Oh,
6 FIPS. Yeah, let's do it. Awesome. Woo.
Sure.
That's the starting rotation you want for a
320
World
ERA
Series
for him
contender.
next year. I'm locking it in.
320? Wow.
Look,
I told you I have to stand up for him, so I'm standing up for him.
Maybe an ERA minus.
I have
4 innings per game.
I spent $10 on an Emerson Hancock autograph card, so obviously I'm a secret fan of his.
Yeah.
Joke's on you.
Is that part of the
Although-
part of the worthless endeavor that you have going on?
Oh, how
Jerry
the
DePoto draft
turntables.
binder, amateur acquisition binder. Yes,
Gotcha.
the one that Goldie doesn't know about.
Although, Colby, I will say you're right. You don't have to get better offensively by trading pitching. You don't even have to do it by trading prospects. You can do it by, signing
Spending
good free
money.
agents. Oh, wait, I forgot. That's not a smart strategy, we were told.
Yeah.
So I forgot. So my bad.
Darn.
Not even soda.
No, we had it figured out. We almost
Yeah.
solved world hunger, guys. We were so close.
Okay.
I actually do have the money. I just don't want to spend it.
Yeah.
Even worse.
Again, it's not a smart strategy, guys. Just get it through your head.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not broke. Please don't call me broke.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to trade a starter, and it's not because I don't think it's a good idea. I think you don't want me to be the GM of the Mariners, but I think that it makes a lot of sense. The Mariners right now remind me of like a NFL team that has a loaded defense but can't score points, and you just end up losing. It's like a classic 7-9, or I guess it'd be now, like a 7-10 team with the way the schedule is now. But just a classic team that can't score but has a good defense. Like, that's the way that I would describe the Mariners. They've got a loaded pitching staff, but we can't score runs. And I don't think we're going to trade a pitcher, and it's because Jerry DePoto said we're not. Usually we can trust what Jerry DePoto says. He's not like John Stanton where got to take it with a grain of salt. When Jerry DePoto talks, usually he speaks the truth. So I don't think we're going to trade a pitcher. If we were to trade one, I think Luis Castillo is the obvious one to me. What makes the most sense? Like Brady said, it sheds the most salary. It would probably line up if you were to get an impact back where you could take on that impact player salary. I don't think there's a player that makes any sort of sense for trading Gilbert or Kirby, and certainly not for Miller or Wu. There's just not that player that you could get back that lines up with the same amount of control, similar contracts. Like, that player just doesn't exist for those 4 younger pitchers. It does for Castillo, and we could rattle off a few, but I think Castillo makes the most sense. I don't think it's going to happen simply because Jerry said it's not.
Well, I'm glad Lyle made that point, because I was just going to say, why don't we just keep the great pitching we have and just go get some hitters on the free agent market? There we go. Simple. But no, I like going last year because I can piggyback off everybody's great points here. I think Castillo would be the most likely. I do not think a pitcher gets traded, and I'm not for it, honestly. Like, there is scenarios where I think trading Castillo can make some sense. Like Colby said, he spend that money back, but it's like, one, I don't trust this team. They're not going to do that. They're just going to not spend the money and say, we're saving it for later and stuff like that. And also, like, trading, this is a team that I do think is trying to compete next year, trying to make a World Series. No, fans don't want to hear that necessarily, but you're trading away a strength, and fine, you got offense, but it's like, and I know F4s and everything, but you trade Castillo and let's say he's worth 3.5 wins, and you go get an offensive player that's also worth 3.5, 4 wins. I mean, sure, you're better offensively, but now you've taken a hit in your pitching staff. Also, like, let's say you do trade, again, Castillo's kind of the common name that comes up. Okay, fine. Now you've got, and right now, without, any additions, you look at your rotation. Okay, Emerson Hancock. I'm not quite as down on him as Colby, but the point still stands. He's not very good. He's fine as, like, he's got to make 3 or 4 starts a year as a spot starter, but I'm not putting him as my number 5. What if Brian Wu gets hurt again? What if Bryce Miller takes a little bit of a step back next year? It's possible. Now all of a sudden that rotation isn't that great. It's still good, but now you've made a strength worse, and fine, your offense is maybe a little bit better, but I don't think you have to trade MLB ready pitching for MLB ready hitting. I think you've got a great strength in this rotation. Use it and continue that to be a strength. I think if the offense can find a little more consistency. I even think the same offense you had last year, just not being the offense they were for the first few months of the season, just find that consistency, they would have been fine this season. I think Colby made that point. Like, you have that offense you had in September, not even have to be that good, but something more consistent over the course of the year. This is a 90-95 win team. I'm not saying don't make any additions. I hate the idea of taking your main strength and going, in order to get better, we've got to pull from that strength to pull up the bottom of the roster, essentially. And I mean, if you do have to make trades, you've got a great farm system to trade for. Ideally, you could go out and just sign hitters, but they're not going to do that outside of the, sort of the secondary guys. But I am completely against trading anybody this rotation. I can stomach Castillo a little bit, but even then, I'm out on it. And, another point with Castillo, he makes every start. I know missed the last few weeks this season. It's maybe not a great time to say that, but you got a workhorse on the mound as well. So I think you trade one of those guys and all of a sudden, yeah, maybe you can get somebody back in a trade. Maybe if you trade with Baltimore, maybe they throw Dean Kramer in on the back end or something and find you've got a number 5 starter that's better than Emerson Hancock. But you're still, like I said, Wu gets hurt, Miller steps back a little bit, and rotation all of a sudden is kind of like fine, but it's not the strength it is now. So I think Castillo's most likely. I don't think they make a trade, and I'm against it all the way. I love the staff. Keep it in place.
Yeah, I hope to God they don't trade anyone out of their starting rotation. I mean, they have the best starting rotation in franchise history and potentially the league. When your 4 and 5 guys have a sub-3 ERA and a sub-1 WHIP, I mean, it's just ridiculous, the quality of guys that they have. Kind of following on to what you guys have been saying, if they did trade a starting pitcher, I would agree Luis Castillo, because it does free up the money to go spend it elsewhere. Assuming that they're not able to trade Castillo because of the no trade clause, I really hope that they wouldn't have to do it, but I would say to trade Logan, because you potentially could get the most out of it, and it extends the runway potentially 2 years more than if you were to trade like a Bryce Miller. And Logan Gilbert this year led the majors in innings pitched and WHIP, so he's extremely valuable. Again, I hope they don't trade him, but you might be able to get the most out of him. Let's hope that they can sign some of these guys to long-term extensions.
Yeah, I don't think they trade a starter either. To go along with the exercise, I'm going to be in the same boat as everybody else. If you had to trade somebody, I think Castillo makes the most sense. He's owed money. He's the oldest. He's not on the decline, but is his ceiling now as high as the other 4 in this rotation? No way. So if somebody were interested in a Luis Castillo trade for what was a package that got you back real impact on offense, yeah, I'd be all for it. If the Orioles said, we're interested in Luis Castillo and we would give you one of our third basemen for him, and the Mariners said, they said you have to eat half the contract, great. Like, I would do that. I would eat $12 million of Castillo's contract to go get Westberg or maybe even Kobe Mayo. But I don't really think that's going to happen. I don't know if Baltimore will be interested in that. And ultimately, I don't really think the Mariners would be interested in trading from their rotation. So I think if anybody were to get traded, it would be Castillo. But no, I don't think a trade's going to happen, because this is the backbone of your team, which is also why I'm basically preparing for what's going to be maybe the most embarrassing offseason they've ever had, where they bring in Gio Urshela, Ahmed Rosario, and a reliever and say, well, this team was just about right on the brink as it is. Look at the great upgrades we made. Now we're set, because guess what? Math, we got unlucky last year. Our one run luck's going to turn around in 25. And we're going to try and sell you on that. So yeah, I'm gearing up for what could be a really, really brutal offseason. But no, I don't think they trade one of the 5 starters.
They're not going to trade anyone from the rotation. I know Brady mentioned the no trade clause. Patrick, you're right, obviously runs through January 1, 2026. Just a reminder though, they did the same thing to Robbie Ray. He had that no TC all the way up until January 1st. They traded him, I believe, on January 3rd. So very, very, very targeted. It very well could have just been a conversation that was, hey, we agree. Okay, awesome. We have to wait a couple of days, then we'll talk. So the one thing I also want to bring up about the Castillo contract, everyone's kind of made the same comment. It's like, oh yeah, it's 3 years, it's $72 million. It's really not that bad of a deal. It isn't. Very fair market value. Obviously, a great contract, has worked out well for the first 2 years. Is everybody forgetting about that $25 million vesting option that exists at the end of that deal? If Castillo throws 180 innings in 2027, now that is a big year. He would have to be healthy in 2027 to achieve it. However, it is there. And that's one of those things where, again, we see it all the time. Pitchers pitch well when they want to get paid. Jordan Montgomery had a hell of a year and turned that into a nice little contract for himself. And now we're getting the GM of that actual team complaining about it. So I think with Castillo too, it's a lot harder to trade him, not just because the no trade clause, but also that vesting option. I mean, it becomes essentially a 4-year, $100 million deal that you'd be giving to a pitcher who's going to be in his 32-year-old season in 2025. Again, he's been relatively healthy for the majority of his career. I kind of trust that Jude comment from the article today, where it was kind of like, yeah, Castillo's actually probably going to be the most difficult one out of that group to trade, not just because of the money, but again, he is 32. Like, it's not like he's old for a pitcher, but he's got some miles. He's thrown a lot of innings in his career so far. So, and again, I agree on the comment too, to an extent that you're really not going to probably find the player for Kirby or Gilbert. I do think the players are there for Brian Wu and Bryce Miller, but the problem is they won't want Brian Wu or Bryce Miller. They will want Logan Gilbert or George Kirby for those bats. So a perfect example, I don't think it's that horrible of an evaluation of a Bryce Miller, Jordan Westbrook style trade. They're going to say no to Jordan Westbrook if it's Bryce Miller. They would say yes if it was Logan Gilbert. That's kind of the hard part, is they are all, in a sense, a bunch of twos, really, really good twos. Yeah, I mean, we always see the argument online of who's the Mariners ace. It doesn't matter who the Mariners ace is. All of them can be aces on any given night. Who cares? But the problem is, though, is there is definitely you see Kirby and Gilbert have those extra years of performance already. They've done it a couple of extra times. They have the more innings. They've shown their health. Brian Wu obviously has a long checkered history with his health. Hopefully we saw the better version of him at the end of this year. Bryce Miller has been consistent. He's also not necessarily the youngest either. He's going to be a little bit high up. Bryce Miller is one of those perfect examples of a guy that's going to get screwed over by Major League Baseball's current payment structures, because he's going to hit free agency at 31? Like, that for him is kind of a bummer. Like, that's kind of why I still believe Bryce Miller is probably the most likely to get extended by the Mariners, because he's truly in a weird spot where if he has any injury in his late 20s, he's kind of going to get hurt on his first potential big payday. It's just, again, I don't think any of them get traded. If I would, it would be Castillo. But again, his no trade also makes it difficult, because even if you want to do a money swap for a player, again, somebody like an Arenado, if that was something they'd be interested in, I would be all ears to listen to it. The problem is, pretty sure Luis Castillo has no interest in going to a team that has basically stated they are going to be doing things differently, which to me sounds a little bit like a step back, not a rebuild. Kind of sounds a little similar in St. Louis. So I don't know if that's somewhere Luis Castillo would choose to go to if they were to try to have that conversation. So again, it would probably be Castillo. But I don't think any of them are realistic. I do agree with Brady. I think Emerson Hancock could potentially get dealt. My big concern there, though, is I think Emerson Hancock provides you more value than he provides value for other teams in Major League Baseball. If you were telling me Emerson Hancock is going to go be somebody's 4 or 5 starter, I'd say that's not a very good rotation. Emerson Hancock's serviceable. I like him. He's been he's had a negative F4 for his career in his starts. He's been fine, but I don't think there's a value of him being in somebody's starting 5 this year.
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make is it kind of sucks, the fact that I have to write that as a prompt as something that is relevant to the conversations around the team in general. And I'm probably going to have,
that's the most interesting question of the offseason, I think.
Yeah.
It is a bummer that it is, but I do think it is. I mean,
yeah,
it's the most compelling story they have.
I agree, because again, they have objectively stated as well they are open for business. That has been the rumor that has been floated out there, that they're not saying no to anybody. Like, if it's a real conversation, they're gonna listen outside of Julio. Like, they're gonna listen, and probably Cal, Julio and Cal, but pretty much if you got a phone call on anybody, they're probably listening from Colt Emerson all the way to Randy. It does not matter. They're gonna listen on anybody if it's the right call.
Thing I would say too is, like, we don't always have to make the money match up. Not everybody is like the Mariners. A lot of them are, but the money doesn't always have to add up. Like, The Red Sox only have $105 million in payroll commitments next year. The Red Sox have $105 million in payroll commitments. They could take on Castillo's whole deal, send the Mariners Tristan Casas, and he could play first base for the Mariners for the next 4 years or whatever. Like, whether you like that or not, everybody can make that work money-wise. It saves the Mariners money, and the Red Sox can greatly afford to take on that money as well.
I agree with you. My point was kind of my face was more towards my comment about trying to trade Bryce Miller for Jordan Westberg. If you called the Red Sox on Tristan Casas, in my opinion, they don't want Luis Castillo. They want Bryce Miller or they want Logan Gilbert.
Yes, they might. Absolutely.
And I don't think Castillo even I think their conversation with us, and again, it's because of how the Red Sox, I know we're both familiar with the Red Sox org pretty well, how they're operating now. They have said they're going to spend more. I'm sure they would love to not have Yoshida on that roster anymore.
Yeah.
They would probably say, yeah, we'll take Luis if we give you Yoshida and maybe we'll throw in a prospect. Like that's kind of, I think that's more likely from Boston. I don't think you can get Cassis for anything less than, to be honest, I don't think you get Cassis for less than Logan. I think that's their ask because he makes a lot of sense, a lot of sense for this roster.
But he's out of favor in Boston.
He is. I saw the Boston Globe article today that should they trade Tristan Casas?
Similar to Colby, I reject the premise of the question.
You forgot the signature sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think they trade. I'll start it off here. I don't think they trade one. I think that Luis Castillo is most likely. However, the Seattle Mariners think it's a bad strategy to go out there and sign free agents, right? It's not part of their strategy. But also, I think free agent hitters kind of think it's a bad strategy to sign with Seattle, like for their future, for their career. Hitters don't want to come here. They've seen what happens. Like time and time again, we have seen players either come here and regress, come here, and so, certainly there are outliers. Like Nelson Cruz is a good one, of course, but not everybody's Nelson Cruz. And I look at it as, like Ty said, a very fine thread or needle or whatever the hell you said, Ty, that the Mariners may not be able to go out there and sign the Willy Adames this offseason. A, they're not going to spend the money. B, why would Willy Adames ever want to come here? And so I look to the free agent market as a subsidiary way of them to go out there and maybe add guys on the fringes. But if they really want to go out there and make impact moves, they have to make a trade. And because that, Joe didn't say it, but just know that before this, when him and I were talking, he talked about trading George Kirby. He didn't mention it. He didn't mention it.
George Kirby to the Mets for Acuna's younger brother. All right, book it. That's what we're going with.
Okay. He is too afraid. But at the same time, when Colby was talking about like Emerson Hancock or whoever being in that fifth starter role and how like your team is worse because of it, look at the Tigers, right? Look at what they did. They have Tarek Skubal and they have Keter Montero or whoever else they want to throw out there, right? And they're making it work because they have the guys in the bullpen. And we've seen it with the Dodgers this postseason as well. Like, again, it's a long season. It's not the exact same thing in a long season because obviously you need guys to go out there and eat innings. But I think that there is a way where you can make it work by having Emerson Hancock as your 5 and then piggybacking him with maybe you have a long guy in your pen. I'm not saying it's a good idea. Rumor has it he's trash, but I think that it's possible. People are saying it's possible.
It's not a rumor, but okay.
If they were to trade one of, I think the guy you probably get the most for, oh gosh, it's tough. I want to say Logan's the guy you get the most for, even though he has the least amount of control, sort of, kind of. But I look at it as he's proven he pitched over 200 innings this year. He had over 200 strikeouts. Like, he is clearly the best pitcher on this staff, in my opinion. You're probably going to get the most for Logan Gilbert. If the Mariners were to trade him, there is a line where all of a sudden you say yes. Like, if you are blown away by what you're offered, you are forced to say yes because in the end, you just want this team to be better. I agree. Pitching is a strength. They should not trade from their pitching, but there is a trade that could come through that you have no choice but to say yes to. And in that case, you go from there. You say, oh, okay, well, we just traded Logan Gilbert, but we got X, Y, and Z back for the offense. And now let's go figure out. And again, it's a great offseason for pitching. Like, the free agent market, there's some pretty solid guys out there on the free agent market. Not to say the Mariners should go out there and spend $30 million, wherever it's going to take to get Corbin Burns. but like they can make up for getting rid of one of Logan Gilbert or something like that by adding somebody who is not nearly as good, of course, but it can work. So I don't know. There's a fine line the Mariners have to walk this offseason for their offense, because again, they're going to have to make trades, in my opinion. They're not going to be able to get guys to come here for anything. Honestly, I don't think you're going to be able to sign free agents. So you're going to have to make trades somehow. And while I'd rather they do that with the prospects, I think that there's a chance that pitching is also involved.